Hi, welcome to the channel. My name is Fred Gambino. I've been working as an illustrator and concept designer for over 40 years now. I originally started out as a book cover artist, working traditionally in oils and acrylics until I jumped onto the digital bandwagon in the 90s. And then I worked as a concept artist on various movies and games, movies like Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor Ragnarok. So just lately I've started going back to working in oils. But it seems a shame not to use all the digital tools I've learned how to use over the last 20 years. So these videos are about combining the two disciplines. So this is a digital image that I created of Breel, who's the main protagonist in my Dark Shepherd trilogy of novels, along with an alien mech that's central to the plot. I'm going to use this image as a rough to base the oil painting on. Actually, this is from book 3, which is in the works at the moment, and I hope will be published at the end of 2026. So here's the photo reference I used for Breel. This model came to the studio some years ago to pose for a series of book covers I was working on. At that time, Titan Books were about to publish an Art of Fred Gambino book, so while she was in the studio, I got her to adopt a number of poses that I could use later for the Dark Shepherd section of the art book. I built a 3D model of the mech for the Titan book as well. This is an edited version because the look and concept behind the character has changed dramatically since those early iterations. So I'm just dragging the interactive renderer into view so I can show you what the render looks like. I have a little trick I use to turn a Modo render into a line drawing. Modo gives the option of various render outputs, but the two I use for this trick are Surface ID and Surface Normal. This is a layered Photoshop file which includes all the different renders. If I drag the Surface Normal layer and Surface ID to the top of the stack, you can see them more clearly. This one is Surface ID. Modo generates a different colour for each surface. I use the Find Edges filter in Photoshop, desaturate the result and end up with this. To add a bit more detail, I do the same to the Surface Normal. Then I go back to the Surface ID layer, set it to multiply, and this is the end result. I did the same thing with the model of the wall pattern. So now I need to put all this together into something I can use to transfer the design to a canvas. This is the Photoshop file I created. I tried using the Find Edges filter on the digital image with mixed results, as you can see. This is the Modo generated line of the wall. I put in a few arcs for the hanging cables, then added the mech outline on another layer. I did a bit of work on this to add details, like the strange dreadlocks. I duplicated the mech layer and then set it to multiply. The Find Edges filter didn't work so well on the photograph of Breel, so I had to go back to basics and draw it by hand. Then I added the tattoos on her arm. I duplicated the Breel layer, set it to multiply to increase the weight of the line, and lowered the opacity of the background layer to add depth and make the drawing clearer. This is a finished line drawing which I printed out onto several sheets of inkjet paper and then taped them together. If you want to see this process, you can refer to some of my other videos. I'll add some links below. In what has become my preferred method these days, I stretched the canvas onto a board and then painted it in a complementary colour. In this case I used cadmium yellow deep. I took the canvas off the board so I could trace the drawing using a light box. Again, I go into some detail about this process in some of my earlier videos, so check out the links below if you're new to the channel. Then I stretch the canvas back onto the board, ready to start painting. Before I start painting though, I'm going to shade the drawing with a pencil to give me a sort of graphite underpainting. I like doing this on the easel. It's good to be able to step back, see the whole thing square on, rather than distorted by perspective as it would be if it was lying on a desktop. Giving it a spray fixative, it's easy to smudge the soft charcoal pencil. So I'm just turning the image on its side to make parts of it easier to get to. I really do enjoy doing drawings like this. It all gets a bit zen-like and I get lost in the process. So the pencil's done. I applied another layer of clear primer to seal the drawing, but you can see it's smudged. So I had to apply the gesso more carefully in small dabs. Once it dries though, the drawing is essentially sealed in plastic and I can then add a final layer more liberally. Finally, it's time to start painting. Since the face is the most important part, I decided to start there rather than my usual method of painting the background in first. After all, if the face doesn't work, I might as well not bother with the rest of it. Nothing is more frustrating than spending several days working on something only to fall at the last hurdle. I do need to put the background in around the face though, so I have some idea of the values I need to use. I do this using a mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. A photo of the model is taped to the canvas, so I can easily refer to it. I often use chisel brushes, especially in these initial stages, because it's possible to get a variety of strokes from broad to fine line with a single brush. So I mixed a bit of lighter blue in with the ultramarine, and this blue is the cerulean blue, which is much colder blue than the ultramarine. It just adds a bit of variety. For the flesh tone shadows, I'm using a mix of olive green and cadmium red. If I want a cooler shade, I add more green and more red to warm it up. The lighter tones are a mix of yellow ochre, white and red. So the face is looking okay at this point, so I'm feeling safe to move on. The dark tones of the t-shirt are ultramarine and burnt sienna. You may have noticed that I use a limited palette, probably only 4 or 5 colours. I think this helps keep cohesion throughout the painting, and it's still possible to mix a whole range of colours. Just added some white to the mix to make a grey. At this point I veered from the photo reference, decided her trousers should be an orange colour to complement the blue. I think I'll try this method of working outwards from the focus of the painting again. It isn't how I would normally work. Normally I'd start with the background, but this way I can see if the painting is working from the outset, and I can reduce the amount of detail the further I move from the centre of interest. This is much more like the way our eyes work. The only bit in focus is the centre of what we see. There are a couple of pros and cons. It's often easier to get a clean edge painting up to something. The downside, especially with this painting, is it can be a pain painting around a complicated shape, and it can be difficult to maintain colour and tone consistency with all the stop-start. The video is at double speed for the most part. It took 3 to 4 days to complete the whole painting. Tones on the mech's legs fade as they get near the bottom of the painting, so I just add a bit more white. In case you're wondering about the yellow underpainting, it peeks through the blue here and there, adding variety to the colour. It's probably a bit hard to see in the video, but when you're looking at the painting it adds a sort of shimmer. I decided I preferred the khaki trousers after all, less distracting, so I painted out the red. Just starting to paint in the background here, you can see how painting around the complicated shape of the mech might be difficult. In the end though, it wasn't too bad and it all went in fairly smoothly. Turning the painting on its side again just to make it easier to get to those areas. That's the background almost done, just tidying up the lines, adding a few highlights here and there, generally cleaning it up. I'm using a fan brush here to soften the edges of the background. In the digital image I used a Gaussian blur to soften the wall and so give it a kind of depth of field feel. So I'm trying to emulate that in oil. Not the easiest thing to do. It's hard to soften the walls while keeping the foreground element sharp, although since Breel is the most important thing in the painting, a bit of softening here and there won't hurt. With the painting pretty much finished, as a final touch, I still have to add Breel's glowing tattoos. I did this by tracing the patterns onto the painted arm. Had to let the painting dry for a couple of days, then I cut a hole into an overlay. Since I'm using a yellow transfer sheet so I can see the tracing against the dark arm, without the overlay I'll end up with bits of colour where I don't want it, just from the pressure of my hand. Using my Cintiq pen for this, I hadn't thought of using it before, but it turned out it worked really well. Having done all that, I went over the tracing with an indelible pen. And that's it, bar the finishing touches. You can see the surface is a bit patchy, where the light catches the shinier parts, but it will even out as it dries, and the final varnish will fix it completely. Here's the final thing, sprayed with a coat of matte varnish. This evens out all the colours, gives a beautiful flat matte surface and makes it a lot easier to photograph. Painted over the lines of the tattoos to soften them and give them the gold colour described in the book. I did a lot more work on the face before I was happy with it. In fact, I totally repainted it. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. Before you go, please click the like icon if you did and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.